they want to talk then around the kind of the idea of non-duality. And the place that they want to start is to say that when you get stuck in well, basically, when you get stuck in the perspective that there is not but, say, linear space and time, and even if you think that there's more than linear space than time, you tend to explain it from the perspective of linear space and time. And one of the main things that they think comes out of that whole perception is is that you get trapped in the either or. It's either this or it's that, right? Like it's left or right, or it's good or bad, or it's up and down. And so in a lot of ways, historically, the whole idea of non-duality, which has shown up in a variety of different ways in many cultures across the expanse of human history, it's part of the way to deal with that either or is to say that it doesn't exist, that it's not really truly that, right? And then part of what can go with all of that is that the expression of, like, say, of being human, for example, that because if either or is really a false construct, like that it really doesn't exist, it's an illusion, and that all there is non-duality, then that means that anything that exists thinking that the illusion is actually truth is at fault. Did y'all follow that one? So that the way the conversations kind of go is sort of they think is kind of like goes around and around trying to prove one thing false or one thing true, and once it's done that, then it tries to prove the opposite false or true, right? So in other words, it's getting stuck in this loop of what what is true, what is reality. And what they would say is that when you look at things like from the perspective of the infinite and the eternal, when you step out of like whatever the limitations to your mind might be in terms of thinking of things from a linear time and space point of view, is that there isn't non-duality, there is unity. There is the expression of all that it is. And that expression of all that is has the capacity to express essentially in an infinite and eternal way. So that what we think of as non-duality is a particular expression of all of it, just like duality would be an expression, right? And so that because what you're dealing with within the concept of unity actually is the and it is that unity is unlimited, it's boundless, there's no limitation, inherent limitation, though you can make choice about the perspective you take to say, like, to explore something or to understand something, right? So sometimes thinking as things as either or can be helpful. But to think that the only way you can think of something as either or, that ends up being, you know, in a lot of situations, especially now, an experience of limitation. And so in that sense, it's what they think often gets called illusion is sort of a judgment on not being whatever with it enough for whatever reason to understand that who you are is illusion. And when you take it from the perspective of unity, and you take it from the perspective of all all that is, whatever you want to call that, God, whatever, there, the illusion is in the idea that there's only one way that it can be experienced. So that because in a certain sense, to say that everything is illusion is its own limitation, right? So that's experience, you know, that's, you know, and not that you can't, you know, not that you can't experience that way. Obviously, if you can talk about it and understand it, you can experience it. But they think that it's really the issue is more about getting to the place where you're experiencing the boundlessness of all of it, and then choosing within your perspective, your awareness, your consciousness, your knowing, of, let's say, what perspective, like what lens serves you in this moment to help you understand whatever it is that you're searching to understand. That's the approach that they would recommend. So because when you step into that sense of the boundlessness, then what you begin to do is to pick up that you are able to turn your attention in whatever direction, you know, serves you in the moment, whatever direction resonates for you in the moment, depending on, you know, like what you're wanting to understand, what you're wanting to work through, what you're wanting to let go, right? And then that is choosing to see this within that boundless kind of way. So that, because they also think that, like, talking about the illusion of things or the misunderstanding, you know, well, let's stick with the word illusion, actually ends up being a judgment that you're not looking at it, quote unquote, the right way, whatever that is. And they would argue that the quote unquote right way is for each person to determine on their own within the moment, within any moment of their life, based on what it is that they're trying to understand or to connect with. That way they're, you know, you're not stepping into like a particular lens or a particular perspective because you think that's the right one or the only way. It's because in the moment, you know, this is the way to look at it. This is the way to get to some understanding, or you may not even be absolutely sure that that's exactly the way you ought to be looking at it. But in the moment, you know, that's what you need to be doing. And you give yourself the grace, the courtesy of trusting yourself that the perspective you're taking is the perspective you need. I mean, it might not always be pleasant, but this isn't about doing in life only that which is pleasant. It's about doing that in life which is aligned with the truth of you in this moment. That's the, you know, like that's the perspective that all of this works within. How'd that do, Cassie?
I'm trying to grasp. Could you say that maybe one sentence and just kind of I don't know, like it's kind of like where your attention flows, let that be it. But um,
So what's the struggle?
I don't know. I don't think there is one. Interesting point of view. I mean, there's this idea of separation because we've become so separate, just like we talk about that love is scarce, right? The thought
Right.
of the thought of being unified as one universal, the drop in the ocean is also scarcity mindset type thing too, because we've become so identified to being addicted to our thoughts. So yeah, to me, I don't know. People put non-duality to it. I just say stop making everything so fucking personal and step back into the background frequency, and you'll find the essence of unity and being connected to the all that is and finding peace in that. I don't know. I just think it can be confusing.
Yeah, well, I think part of what is it can be really confusing on these topics, for example, is that a lot of people have a lot to say about them and have said over the centuries. And and like if we just confine the discussion to English, then there are words that get used differently depending on who's using them. And then that brings in its own, trouble for us in a variety of different ways because we're still trying to understand, like, so, you know, so that I guess what they want to say is they think in some respects the trouble that they think you might be in the middle of is a little bit almost more linguistic, in the sense of different words mean different things. And that's okay, right? Because I mean, like that's not to say, go out and change your vocabulary or anything, or that, anybody should go out and change their vocabulary. It's just what they would suggest is really just, um, it's like sinking into it and allowing the, like the understanding to just kind of come to you in your awareness rather and not spend a lot of time getting, like, I don't know, super intellectual about it. Um, because a lot of these kinds of questions, like that deal with sort of like, say, what's the nature of the universe? What's the nature of all that is? There that is just like super shifting right now. And a lot of the ways we've talked about it over the last couple of thousand years ago, the last 1,000 years or so, has is really changing. And even just 5 years from now, for example, there there is so much coming in terms of new perspectives that if even if you're just paying attention like just a tiny bit, 5 years from now the way we approach all of this is going to be very, very, very different. So it's like almost more like absorb it rather than um and intellectually analyze it, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, absolutely. And I thank you for that. And that's true. I mean, if you can really look at it from the perspective of unity and universal and the all that is, to me, that's what non-duality is. And when you can background into that frequency and feel the connection and detach from your judgment of every fucking thing, then there you go. Non-duality, not two. You are one
Yeah,
with all that
yeah.
is. Period.
And you have the inherent capacity to discern differences within the unity, because essentially that's what duality is, right? Like in some ways, the false concept is essentially the word dual, that, everything has its opposite. And it's not that opposites aren't there, it's that it's the premise that we have to polarize everything. But that whole effort at polarization is what comes from living for 3,000 years or so with the whole power dynamic of humanity be focused on power over instead of being focused on power with and power within. Because when you begin to really let go of the influence of power over, there's just all kinds of things that either don't make sense anymore or don't need to make sense anymore, because within a power with, power within perspective, it's inherently about connection. So things that have been really good at separating don't work anymore. And that's part of the reason why they're saying, like, over the next 5 years, there's going to be such a shift in our ability, because we'll have, the momentum of this shift will have, like, hit top speed. And a lot of things that we struggled with even now, we won't struggle with in the same way, because we will, because we are in the middle of that process of completely shifting the perspective that we take to who we are, why we are here, and whether or not we're good enough. Like, we deal with those questions in a completely different way. We're in the middle of it to the degree that it's hard to even see that we're in the middle of it. Right? Like, however you want to see that, like, we're right almost to the top of the mountain, and we're so close we can't see it because we're that close. It's that kind of moment. It's that kind of dynamic power shift that's happening.